The mass shooting in Orlando on Sunday, June 12th, brought many issues concerning gun rights, the Muslim community, and the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender movement to the forefront. We'll discuss some of these issues on this edition of Talking with Henrietta, coming up next. Hi, I'm Henrietta. Welcome to the show. Most of us were shocked to hear the news about the mass shooting that occurred at the Pulse Club in Orlando, Florida. The club was described as Orlando's hottest gay bar. Some are calling the shooting, which left 50 people dead, one of this nation's worst terror attacks since 9/11, and the deadliest incidents of violence against the LGBT community in U.S. history. On this show, we'll discuss some of the ramifications that this event might have on the LGBT movement, and we'll examine some of the cultural perceptions held about the movement by some Americans and by some in the Muslim community. I have two members of the LGBT movement with me now. Seated on my left is Brad Becker. Mr. Becker is the executive director of the Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, and Transgender National Help Center, which he founded 20 years ago. He started as a volunteer in the movement in New York City and has been involved in LGBT issues for the past 30 years. Chivis Moore is seated on my right. Ms. Moore is an American lesbian feminist who has lived in the Middle East for 16 years. She is currently working to debunk unflattering myths about Islam and the LGBT community. She is also the author of a new book called First Tie Your Camel, Then Trust in God. I'd also like to welcome two studio audience members who are here with me, and I'd like to thank everyone, including the two of you, for being here with me on the show.
Thank you for inviting us.
Of course, it's my pleasure. Now, I'm wondering if you would share with me, I talked at the top of the show about most of us being shocked. Do you remember perhaps your first reaction when you heard the news about the shooting?
I do. I remember I checked the news every morning online, and I was getting up early and looking at CNN's website and saw mass shooting in Orlando, and at that point I didn't have that much more information than that. And then it was appalling to read that, and then as I read further to see that it affected the LGBT community, it really struck home even more, and was just devastated. And I think that my mind kind of went to the folks that call our hotline and knowing kind of how this would impact them, and especially young people who are, have been struggling with their sexuality and may have just recently come out, and then to see that and understanding the terrible impact that would have on them is one of the things that kind of immediately went through my mind.
Sure. Chivis, do you remember what you felt?
Yes, I do. First absorbing the horror of any mass killing, then hearing that it was people of my own kind, so to speak. Those were my first two reactions. And right on the heels of those came, I certainly hope it's not someone with a Muslim name. Because despite the fact that there have been 133 mass killings this year in this country, and very few of them by Muslims, anything that happens with anyone with a Muslim name plays right into the Islamophobia that is such a problem, in my opinion, in this country today.
Have either of you drawn any conclusions whether this was someone who was, they talk about different motivations, who was gay and was doing this in reaction to being gay? It's said that he might have been gay himself, or if this was more terrorist.
That's a good question. There's so many layers to this tragedy, and I don't think it's clear yet, exactly what the motivations were. There's a lot of conflicting information. There's a lot of pieces of information. I think, the only thing we do know for sure is that 49 people were killed, and more than that, seriously injured. And I think, the sorting out is going to happen over time, but just the impact of what happened, regardless of the motive, is just so painful, I think, to so many people.
Sure. Now, this was a bar, I think they were having Latin night at that particular time. So most of the victims were said to be Latino. Do you think this has any particular significance? Was it just coincidental, or?
Well, as Brad said, I would hate to make any decisions or statements about what could have happened. A rumor is that he was gay and had had sex with someone who was HIV positive, and that it could have been a revenge killing. But, there's so much that we jump on right away when anything like this happens, and so often it turns out to be incorrect. I have absolutely no idea. I just don't know.
Sure, I think that sounds very wise, doesn't it?
I think, you bring up a really important point about the Latino community being impacted so strongly. This is, a marginalized community within a marginalized community. And so I think it's, if you step back from the tragedy and you look at how it's being reported in the media, for instance, you see situations where some people aren't even acknowledging that it was a gay club. It was, you've got some elected officials who were calling it a young person's club, and just won't say LGBT. And then even among even our own community, I think there's a lot of people that aren't acknowledging that the victims were almost all of the Hispanic community. And that's been a community that's really struggled, even within the larger LGBT community. So I think it hits doubly home for a lot of people.
Let's go back. You said many politicians aren't even acknowledging that this affected the LGBT community. They say young person's club. Why do you think that's the case? What's the hesitancy?
That's a good question. When this story first broke, I think everybody was, a lot of political figures were very quick to take to Twitter and to offer condolences to family and loved ones of those that were killed. When we knew from the very beginning that these were almost all LGBT people, this was a gay nightclub, this wasn't just a random group of people. And to not even acknowledge that truth is stunning to me. It's unfortunate that the way politics are, you have one particular party over another that is much more reluctant to embrace, let's say, civil rights for LGBT people. And so out of fear of, I think, damaging their reputation within their voter base, they're afraid to even say that the people that got killed were LGBT.
Well, I'm thinking, and before I get to you, Chivis, on this, do you think, I know this might not be a consideration, that not everyone there who was there had to be within the LGBT community. So it's to paint everyone with the same brush. And so maybe that might be, or could be, a factor in the reluctance?
I don't think it is.
Okay.
I don't think it is. I think that, especially when these messages started coming out, you would see a lot of tweets from Republican office holders that were saying, my condolences to the loved ones. We knew at that point it was an LGBT club. We didn't know anything about particular victims at that point. So I think it's a reasonable assumption to make that you would assume that most people, if not all that were injured, were members of the LGBT community within a gay club. As it turned out, not everyone was, but the vast majority were. So I think, I don't think it was a question of, well, we didn't want to paint everyone with a broad brush. I think it was just a reluctance to acknowledge that these were gay people that got killed.
Do you think it was it was the fact that they couldn't even bear to say the words? Or do you think it was the fact that they didn't want to be giving condolences to families of gays because they didn't want to be seen as somehow in favor of gays? Or
Yeah, I think it's the two of those things, and that's the sad part. I mean, regardless of where someone stands on LGBT rights, right, we could have an interesting conversation with someone about why that's an important thing for us as a society. But regardless of where you stand on it, it's just human decency to acknowledge that type of a loss. And when you have the biggest mass shooting in U.S. history inside a gay bar, to not acknowledge that that's where it happened is almost cruel. It's taking it to a level of, not only do I not favor people's equal rights, but I don't even want to acknowledge that you existed. And I think for a community that was in mourning, that came across very loud and clear.
Well, it's very interesting because I just sat here and I thought in terms of the sympathy that in some sectors, acknowledging that it was a gay bar might decrease the level of sympathy for some people. For example, there was a pastor in California who made some comments that there should have been more people. I mean, that was absolutely unthinkable.
You
haven't heard that?
No.
Oh, yes.
No.
Yes. So everybody, they all should be more, I hate to even say it, put up against the wall.
Yes, it rings a bell, right. They go over me, these comments.
Yes, and I'm sure that
Yes,
acknowledgement
put up against the wall.
would not go well for some people.
And I think that's the exact reason why you do acknowledge it, so that you're not giving in to that kind of bias and that kind of homophobia. I think to pretend it didn't happen where it happened out of fear of offending someone who shouldn't be offended, that's not the way it should work. And so I think we raise our voices even louder in the face of that.
I agree with that.
Now, Chivas, you have lived in about 4 Middle Eastern countries over the past 16 years. And one of your goals is to debunk the myth about some of the myths in terms of Islam and sexuality. Would it have been considered common for someone who's Muslim to not be at ease with the fact of being gay?
Well, I think it would be common with practically everyone not to be at ease with people who are gay. In this country, we still are fighting every day for respect. And when I was growing up, I could lose my job, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't actually write the book to debunk myths about Islam and sexuality, because I'm not a Muslim and I don't actually know that much about it because I was not out when I was living in the 3 Arab countries I lived in, or Israel, the 4th country that I lived in. I told close friends of mine, and I definitely got the impression I spoke to them, I'd say, where are all the lesbians? I mean, we'd talk. And I heard about lesbians and gays. There's a city in the West Bank, Nablus, that's kind of famous for having gay people. Would talk about it. Nobody was being stoned. Nobody was being arrested. Nobody was being thrown out. In Israel, guys who go to the gay bar, even as late as in 2014, being rounded up and taken to jail, and they're all covering their faces, and it's really very hard to see.
So there is repression.
There is. And it varies from place to place, from person to person, from time to time. I would say in the West Bank, there's very little reaction. I mean, there was a woman from USAID who was a lesbian, and she was renting a house in Ramallah and renting to Palestinian women and apparently putting the make on them, which my friends who told me about it didn't think it was any better an idea than I did. No one kicked her out. She didn't lose her job. I was told, there's a sexuality in the Muslim world is very private. And you don't even see a man and a woman who are married kiss on the street or hold hands, usually. Things are changing. Everything is changing. But still, I would say that's pretty much true. So, but on the other hand, you do see men holding hands, men kissing each other, women with their arms around each other and kissing each other. When I first was in Egypt, in 1978, I'm not sure it's still happening, but I'd see men sitting on each other's laps and just being really affectionate. So on the one hand, between members of the same sex, there can be a great deal of demonstration of physical affection. Sexually, it's pretty hidden. And I know for a fact that, for instance, when I went to Syria, I was told that a foreigner had been kicked out of the country for being gay. And when I moved to the West Bank, I was told by a colleague, kind of out of the blue, I'd never talked about it, that someone had been fired from Birzeit University for being gay. Again, I'm not sure that would still happen. That was in 1997. But so things are changing, and some of the Muslim countries have laws that make being gay criminal. And the Saudi Arabia, our great close ally, our favorite Middle Eastern country, whom we arm to the teeth, is one of the worst on the subject of gay rights.
Sure, we can come back to that. I'm just wondering, Beth, you had mentioned calls coming into your hotline immediately after the incident. What type of calls came in?
We got, I think they fell into two categories broadly. I think there were calls that I expected we would get, which were people saying, I'm afraid now to be out. I'm afraid that someone's going to try to kill me. I'm always looking over my shoulder now. And in those situations, we wanted to give people the room to express those fears and to understand that these are real feelings that they're having, and at the same time to let them know that there is a very welcoming community for them, and that we stand strongest when we stand together, and that to isolate ourselves even more in the face of this tragedy would be a double tragedy. So that was kind of one group of calls that we got. The second was one that really surprised me, which were people who are still closeted, who have said, you know, I've been in the closet for so long, and I heard about what happened in Orlando, and I'm not going to stay closeted anymore. And for them, it was kind of a way to say, you know, you're not going to bring me down, you're not going to get me for this. And so for those people, it actually encouraged them to want to come out, which was something I didn't expect that we would be receiving.
Now, when you talk about people coming out, I'm wondering, there is an expression, I guess, on the down low, people who might be married, acting as heterosexuals, who actually are still in the closet. So do you, within those whom you help, is this kind of commonplace, or what would you say is the incidence of it?
Of people being married?
Yes, to members of the opposite sex.
I think that there are certainly a lot of people that are married. I think what we typically hear is that many people, when they were in their early 20s, and let's say we're talking to someone who's maybe 40 or 50 now, at that time, being openly gay was even less accepted than it is now, particularly in certain parts of the country. And so the societal expectation was you get married to the opposite sex and you have a family and you have kids. And the pressure to do that was very great, and that's what they did. And I don't think many of them consider themselves to be gay or bisexual. I think they had this secret, this feeling that they compartmentalized inside of them out of necessity very often, so that they really thought of themselves as straight people who had this attraction for the same sex, but I'm not going to think about that very much. So it wasn't a deliberate attempt to fool anyone or even themselves. And then they reach a certain point in their lives where these feelings obviously don't go away, and they continue to get stronger, and they realize, you know, I'm living a life that is unhealthy for me and unhealthy for my spouse, because I can't be there in the way that they would want. And so I think that's when we get calls from folks like that who are trying to figure out what to do. And that's a huge, upheaval in someone's life to try to make that change, especially when there's kids and other people involved. But and so that's one of the things that we do on our hotline, is to kind of help them to start to think about that and talk about it, to talk about how they, forgetting about any decision making, just how do they feel about the fact that they have these attractions, and help them try to ideally get to a point where they feel okay about themselves, and then to be able to help them figure out what's going to make sense for them in their lives. So we do speak to a lot of people. I think as it becomes easier, and as it has become easier to be out younger, that's less and less of an issue. But certainly we're not past that yet.
Sure. So Chivas, you mentioned that you had not come out in the Middle East. Was that a problem for you? Did you not come out because you were concerned about your life, or what were the circumstances?
Never about my personal safety. When I first went in 1978 and 79, I worked with a very wonderful Muslim man who was very religious. And although I'm out in the United States, and I feel it's my responsibility to be out in the United States to, show other people that it's okay, that you're not a freak, and to work for gay rights in this country, I just really didn't want to get rejected. It was too important to me, and I wasn't there to change another culture. I felt really strongly I was there to learn.
And what was so very interesting, you went as a carpenter.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Well, that meant nothing. I mean, nobody thought anything of that.
As a woman being a carpenter?
No, not a thing. It wasn't a tip-off. No, it wasn't. And in fact, there are women who are carpenters who are not lesbians, but no, it wasn't strange that I was traveling alone. It was strange that I had left a job.
Well, tell me, when you were traveling...
Because the economy is so difficult.
When you were traveling through the Middle East, did you have to wear the clothes that we see Muslim women in? What is it, the hijab? Or? Well,
there are so many different clothes that different women in different areas, and at Birzeit University, there'd be two sisters in Palestine, in the West Bank. Two women would walk. My students were half very strict Muslim, Hamas members, probably in name, not in card carrying, and then another very secular, and some Christian. You'd see two sisters or a mother and a daughter walking down the street, and the mother would be covered, or the daughter would be covered, and the mother wouldn't, or one sister would and one sister wouldn't.
They wouldn't be in shorts, though.
Even in the same, well, shorts, still no, but Israel is having a big effect on the West Bank in particular, and in Israel, women, when I first worked in Israel, I thought, women are dressing like prostitutes. I mean, they were like really short dresses and really tight, and so it's having an effect.
That was in the late 70s.
No, that was in the 90s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Anyway, that's having an effect somewhat. So there are shorter clothes, there are tighter clothes among many, many people in the West Bank, but that's unusual. Syria's off by itself. Egypt is more of its own country. So what I wore was loose pants, and I wore long sleeves, and that was it.
And no head covering.
No head covering, and that was in the 70s. Interestingly enough, in the 1970s in Egypt, there were fewer women wearing head coverings than there were when I went back in the 90s. And they were in the 90s taking it as a political stand, saying, we are not like the West. We don't have the commercialism, the materialism, the lack of religion of the West, and we want to show you that we're different. And it was a statement of pride. So there are all kinds of reasons why women dress. And now, if we're talking about Iran or Afghanistan, which are of course not Arab countries, but our Muslim countries, I haven't been there, but I
Sure.
understand that there are
Sure.
laws saying that you must cover yourself.
Sure. It would be remiss of me not to mention that this month is the 1-year anniversary of the Supreme Court decision legalizing same-sex marriage in the United States. What significance might that have?
Are you married?
I am.
Me too.
I am. Congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations.
Gosh,
And were you married before last year?
Yes, Tim and I were very fortunate to get married during that little window in 2008 when it was legal to get married in California.
Was that when Gavin Newsom?
Well, he started doing marriages that were not legally recognized. They were very important, and I think they started that movement, but they weren't legally recognized as marriages. And then there was a period of time in the summer, I think, of 2008, where it became legal to be married before it became illegal again.
Right.
And so we were one of, a relatively few number of gay couples that were able to be married, and then other people couldn't. And it took years again until it became legal.
Was your marriage still recognized when it became illegal?
Yes.
Yes, ours
Yes.
passed. I was married at the same
time.
summer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Although the opposition to gay marriage tried to make an issue in the courts to have our marriages annulled.
Was that with the a petition? No, I'm thinking an issue on the ballot that
there
came
was
out.
Prop 8.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so it went from being illegal to be married in California to being legal to not being legal again to being legal. And I think if you said to someone who wasn't a member of the LGBT community, we're going to make it legal, we're going to make it illegal, then we're going to legalize it, then we're going to make it illegal again. People would say, no, you're not. I have the right to get married, knock it off. And yet this happened, to us. And in some ways, you almost felt guilty during that time that, I was one of the lucky ones that was able to get married.
Right.
But here are my friends who are just as much a couple as I am that had that right taken back. So the significance of the Supreme Court ruling last year was enormous because at that point, California as a state had legalized it, but many other states had not. And other states would not necessarily recognize our marriage. So we have a son. And so if we were to go across the country and we were to visit friends in a particular state and God forbid our son were to get injured and had to go to the hospital, we would not be recognized, both of us, as his parents because that state would not recognize our marriage.
So, but what effect would that have in terms of your being his caretaker and your being the authority figure to talk about the type of medical treatment that he should receive?
Well, it was a mess because it would mean that, well, who's the parent? Who is the state going to recognize as a legal parent? We both adopted him jointly. We're both married. We're both his parents. But are they going to say, I'm his parent, but Tim is not? Are they going to say, Tim is, but I'm not? Are they going to say, we can't figure it out, so none of you are? We're going to appoint someone to tell, to decide what happens to your son? It was really horrendous.
Can you be the primary guardian? I mean, if they didn't recognize the marriage, could they still recognize you as the guardian?
I'm going to guess it depends on who you asked.
Yeah.
And
at that
depending on
time.
which state.
Right.
It's depending on which state, depending on which judge you tried to, and think about trying to do that in a crisis situation when your kid is in the hospital, and an immediate decision has to be made. So we didn't, we made a decision. We're not traveling to those states while that was happening. And it's absurd. So the wonderful thing about the Supreme Court ruling was it took all of that away. And it said that if you're an American citizen, no matter where you live, you have the right to get married. And no other state can take that away from you. And that was
Alabama, Mississippi.
hard as they tried, and as much as they delayed. And to my knowledge, there may be still little pockets within some of those states where the county clerk still won't issue a license.
Yes.
But by and large, you can get married anywhere now.
Sure. Did you face a problem?
No, but what we kept hearing about in the news over and over were a partner who got very sick, and then her lesbian partner was unable to visit her in the hospital, or couldn't make any decisions about her health, and was just cut out.
Can't anybody visit anybody in the hospital?
No, even now, I went to visit my partner and had to, no, I'm the partner, I'm the spouse, I've got the marriage document, I can visit her. And, friend, no.
Right. A lot of times it's family only.
Yeah.
And so you have to prove that you're family.
Yeah.
Even if you've been together 20 years, you have to prove that you're family.
Ah.
So now, we're married. Okay, it's not a problem.
And you're entitled to all of the benefits. I mean, you're entitled to, for the health care.
Right, healthcare, taxes help. In many cases.
Beneficiaries.
Yes.
And I think it's important, too, to note that, all of those thousands of rights that come with being married that people take for granted are incredibly important. But there's also the basic issue of just human dignity. That I have the right to marry the person that I love as much as anyone else. And I shouldn't have to say, well, I need it because what if I have to go to the hospital, or I need it if something bad. You shouldn't even have to do that. It should just be a basic human right that we're all treated the same. And so it was very, it made us second-class citizens. And there's many things now, there's laws now or lack of laws that make LGBT people second-class citizens in a lot of places.
We'll talk about some of that, but since we have two members of our studio audience sitting here, I'd like to give them a chance if they have any questions, if they have any observations.
Well, one thing that strikes me...
Do you have a microphone? Oh, you'll have a microphone soon.
One of the things that strikes me, picking up on the marriage conversation and the seminal nature of the Supreme Court's decision, is that it can lead to a perception that kind of, we won. The gay rights LGBT community has won, and so we're done and we can move on. And it kind of strikes me, when you have an event like Orlando, having got that environment, how does that affect the community, and how does it affect the community's way forward, and how does it inform how the community tries to go forward?
Well, I would think there would be a lot of sympathy. Do you think that would assist, with a few exceptions, in encouraging or in supporting the community in going forward?
I'm not sure about that, but I have a gay Muslim friend, and his reaction, he was shocked, and he just said, we thought we were all safe in this country, because this isn't his country, and he had come and he got all these, seen what progress had been made, and this is in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is a little island of progressiveness in many ways, and he just said, I'm terrified. I thought I was safe here, but I'm not. Not while there's all those guns around too.
Ah.
And I think, in picking up on that question about we won after the Supreme Court ruling, we won the right to get married, but you can, in many states, you can get married in the morning and you can get fired from your job in the afternoon. And in speaking specifically about Orlando, you, depending on where you might live within Florida, you went and visited this club and you got seriously injured, and you're in the hospital and the media is all there and paying attention and your name is on the screen. Well, you go back to work when you get out, and if your boss doesn't like the fact that you're gay, you're fired. And
without cause.
Without cause, without needing to do anything else. And in many parts of Florida, that's still legal. And I think there's been polls taken of the American public, and you say, is it legal to fire someone just because they're gay? And people will say, no, that's against the law. You can't do that. And that's not the reality. In 30 states, there is not a protection for people based on sexual orientation or gender identity.
But isn't it a federal law in terms of non-discrimination, in terms of equal employment, where employers can't discriminate on the
Supposedly,
basis of
but,
race
I mean, I
and
knew a
sexual
woman.
orient. Isn't that
If-
in the
if-
federal laws?
If only, Henrietta,
Yeah.
if only. No, there's not a law.
In
There's
the
not.
equal,
No, there are.
Well, what
there
is
are,
it that's in that I'm
So there are
quoting?
protected classes of people, right? And that includes race, it includes gender, it may include age, but it does not include sexual orientation, and it does not include gender identity. And there have been
So
attempts.
gender doesn't cover gender identity.
No, it doesn't.
I see. Yeah.
And so there have been attempts for the last 2 decades to get a federal law passed. And it is not even allowed to come up for a vote in the Republican-controlled House. They won't even let it come up for a vote, even though the majority of Americans approve of that, approve of saying you shouldn't be able to be fired because you're gay. It can't even be voted on. So there's no federal protection. So the only thing that is out there are states, or if the state won't allow it, local cities or counties. What we just saw in April or May in North Carolina is they went and passed a law that said none of their, so North Carolina does not have any protection, and yet Charlotte did within the state. The state went and said, we're taking back the right of any city within our state to offer those protections.
Oh, great.
So here you had people in Charlotte who were protected. They were out at work, right? They had a law protecting them. The state took the law away.
Why? What was the rationale?
They don't like gays.
Yeah.
No, it has to be something I would think more subtle than that.
No, I think
It isn't really
maybe
subtle.
they're afraid of them. I
I'm
don't know.
thinking,
Maybe
you
they're
know,
afraid
the
they're gay.
wording
Who
of
knows?
things like that sometimes
Well,
are
it's also
more.
against, I mean, if you wanted to go to the Quran, to the Bible, to the Talmud, you'd find all these verses against gayness, which Muslims, Christian bred people, Jews ignore, right? We don't believe that those are really what God means today. But there are people who do believe them. And
Like the county
and
clerk.
think it's just heinous that this is, that was the attitude that I was brought up with, that it was awful to be gay. It took me decades to accept the fact that I was gay because I internalized all of those. I thought I was abnormal. I took myself off to a psychiatrist. That I felt that way about myself. So
What did the
I
psychiatrist
wanted
tell
to
you?
tell you nothing.
Yes.
He didn't talk. That was the kind that didn't talk in those days. Muslim Americans, I'm so happy to tell you this, 45% think that gay marriage is just a great idea and are in favor of it. And that's
this
more
country.
than Muslim American, and that's more than Jehovah's Witnesses, many black Protestants, Mormons, right. So it's kind of nice, they're American, they're adopting some of the better aspects of what we like to think of as.
Sure, we could go on. Now, before I turn to Elizabeth to see if she has a question, is California one of those states that has the protection?
It does. It does.
Okay.
California kind of leads the way in many cases with that. So fortunately, we do. But if
When did
we,
it get it though, Brad?
I don't know the exact year,
Because
but
I know a woman who had to fight and take the University of California at Santa Cruz to court because she was losing her job because she was a lesbian.
Yeah, I don't know the exact. I know it was incremental in that first it was gay and lesbian folks and bisexual folks, and not transgender people, and then that was subsequently added on. So you have to kind of fight for each little crumb there until you say, okay, we're finally just equal. We're hired and fired based on the quality of our work, not on any other characteristics. But yes, California has that, but the majority of states don't. And most people think that's incredible, regardless of their view on gay people.
Unless you're in one of those states.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a good point about religion. I think that it's sad that religion is used by many people as an excuse to discriminate. And I think that that's the absolute opposite of what religion should be. Right? Religion is about loving each other and not judging
Love one
people.
another,
right?
yes.
And
So
instead it gets
those-
twisted.
Aren't those the equivalent verses? I mean, if you can find verses that people can quote to discriminate, aren't there comparable verses like the love one another that you can find that would say it's okay to be who it is that you are?
Yeah, Islam is a very tolerant religion, despite all the people, the media and the politicians in this country who think it's not. When I lived there, I was really amazed that people were, I mean, I have no religion. I was raised Christian and left it when I saw how Christians acted. And I was afraid in the beginning to say that I had no religion because I was in a Muslim country. But from the very beginning, I was honest about it and said, no, I really don't. I believe something, but it has no clothes. It doesn't have a mosque or a synagogue or a church. It doesn't have ritual. I believe something, but I can't say, you know, what it is, and it's not a God that has a masculine name. And I remember one old guy serving tea, you know, by the banks of the Nile one morning. He said, "Oh, I know, I recognize you. You're a fellow traveler. We write about you in the Quran." And I thought, far out, you know.
On the road to Damascus?
Yeah.
And you run into the Good Samaritan, or are you all the Good Samaritans? Elizabeth, do you have a question?
So, as I'm listening to you all have this conversation, I think a lot of us, and myself included, sometimes it is difficult to understand and really realize that there's still this discrimination going on, especially here in California, because I feel like we're a little bit more liberal here. So it is shocking to hear that that's still going on. What do you think it would take to finally get to a place where we all just finally accept each other? And because to me, you know, I feel like it's so shocking. And as while I'm at work, I know that there are a lot of rules that I have to follow, and you know, I have to make sure that I say certain things and make sure that I'm not discriminating or offending anyone. What do you think it'll take for everyone to realize that we should all just be accepting of each other and get to a place where we can all just be happy and respect one another?
When we do, there will be no more war. There won't be any more war. You know, if we really respected each other, we wouldn't ever kill each other. And it would have to go way beyond the... Actually, I just read recently that lesbians and gays and bisexuals and trans are the most discriminated against minority in the U.S., which surprised me because I would have thought African American. Yeah, well, Brad's wiser than I am. What'll it take,
We're in trouble
Brad?
now. We're in trouble now. I mean, I think it's going to take a few things. I think part of it is going to be generational. I think, you know, when you look at polls from younger folks, there's a much stronger support for equal rights than for people that are more on in their lives. And so part of it is generational. I think a second thing is education, is helping people to really truly understand it. And I think really the most important thing is, if it's safe for someone, is to come out. Mm-hmm. Because when someone knows someone who is LGBT, it's a completely different situation than just talking about it theoretically. It can be easy to say, I don't believe those people should have rights. But when it's my next door neighbor or my sister, you know, or the person I work with who I really like, that changes people's minds and changes their hearts. And so we've seen that when people know someone who is LGBT, their views change dramatically. So I think when people can, coming out is the biggest thing that you can do to change people's minds.
Yes, but at the same time, that coming out puts a person at risk.
Absolutely does.
Puts them at tremendous risk.
It does.
And I would think they might have to always be watching their back, not knowing. Friends that they may have who might suddenly disappear, or family members. You know, if it's a young person, the acceptance of the family. So you never know what you're quite up against.
Right. And I realize the irony of you know, me saying that, sitting in this bubble of San Francisco and the Bay Area, and I think the true heroes are the folks in Alabama and Mississippi and other places who do come out in spite of the fact that they can lose family and friends and their jobs. And so, you know,
So how do you tell anybody, come out?
I don't think you tell anyone. I think what you do is you talk to people about how they. I think the first thing is you talk to people about how they feel about themselves, and I think that the first step in coming out is coming out to yourself, you know, and feeling good about who you are, and feeling that you're just as valid as anyone else. And I think that can help people then make whatever decisions are going to be right in their lives about coming out. Coming out doesn't have to be a singular event that I'm out to either no one or everyone. It can be, I'm going to talk to my best friend because I think I can trust them. Or I'm going to talk to a relative because I think they're going to be okay. So it's not like you have to just come out to everyone if you don't think that that's safe, and if you don't think those people have earned the right to know that about you.
But at the same time, I'm thinking if you say, I'll come out to my best friend, or I'll come out to a family member, and that person rejects you, I'm sure that can be very, very difficult. So how did you do it, Chivas? You said
Well,
it took you years.
Yeah, I think Brad's absolutely right. I had to make it okay with myself. And when it was okay with myself, let the pieces fall where they may.
How do you make it okay with yourself?
I think you look deeply into yourself and you say, what is really important? And do I want to hide my whole life? And what does this really mean about me? I had to do the same thing when I began speaking up for Palestinians. Right away, I knew, and I waited years to do that. I am not a brave person. I waited and waited. Oh, I'd be called anti-Semitic, you know. And I thought about it, and I read about it, and I learned more and more and more until finally I thought, I am not going to keep quiet anymore. And at the first meeting where I said one word, not anti-Israeli, definitely not anti-Jewish, I was called an anti-Semite. And it just rolled right off. I already had accepted that. I'd looked at it. Am I? No, I'm not. Am I horrible and grotesque because I'm a lesbian? No, I'm not. So, and you know, in my case, I'm much older than you. In the 60s and 70s, I was greatly helped by the women's movement and the lesbian movement in this area. I moved to this area. I was very lucky that I did that. And women all around me were accepting that they were lesbian. In fact, a whole bunch of them has gone back to being straight since then, because there was a big, you know, it was really great to be a lesbian for a time. And that there was women's music and, you know, events where we got together, and there were bars where we could go and dance, and it couldn't have been easier for me.
That's interesting that there were people who were lesbian who went back to being straight. I will ask you if men who are homosexuals go back to being straight. But anyway,
I brought up a bad topic.
No, you didn't. You didn't. I mean, it's been illegal now to attempt to give someone that type of therapy to make them be whoever it is that they aren't. But why would somebody who's lesbian decide to go back to being?
I think they weren't. I think they thought it was fun, and it was, everybody was turning into a lesbian, and I think a lot of people, you know, I think actually that we all have a great deal of sexual attraction to both sexes, or to whatever the genders and the sexes are. I think the Arab world shows that to some degree. I think there's a much more diffuse idea of sexuality, and it's not so much I'm this or I'm that. So I think we have natural tendencies that, if not stifled, can come all different ways and at different times. And I think there was this great flurry it was up in Mendocino County in Albion, and it seemed like everybody all of a sudden was a lesbian, and then those of us who really were stayed, and some of the others, not many, but some of the others went back to men, and never felt bad about either role.
Yeah, I think there's a misunderstanding sometimes in those kind of situations where I think it probably is inaccurate to say that these were lesbians who, became straight again.
I agree.
I think these were, either people that are bisexual or people that were experimenting. And all those things are fine. But what we understand about sexuality is that you can't just flip a switch and turn it on and off. And we understand that someone's sexual orientation, whatever it is, gay, straight, bi, whatever, is usually formed within us either before we're born or within the very first few years of each person's life. So sometimes people may be with a particular gender, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're exclusively gay or bisexual. And I think, I'm sorry, gay or lesbian. And so I think what happens for folks that are bisexual, one of the kinds of discrimination is that their sexuality is defined by the person they happen to be with at that moment. So if you're bisexual and you're with someone of the same sex, people consider you to be gay. If you're bisexual and you're with someone of the opposite sex, they assume that you're now straight. You've changed to straight. No, I've always been bisexual. I'm just dating a man or I'm dating a woman. So I think that's probably closer to what was going on, I think, in those situations, that these were folks that were not gay or lesbian, they were.
What does it mean for society when, with the concept of family, perhaps, with the concept of what a family should be, when you can embrace all these variations in terms of sexuality? I'm thinking people who look at things from a very linear, rigid point of view think this is threatening, and it means a breakdown of society. It means a breakdown of culture that we know it. It's the ending of America, or it's the end of, I don't want to say civilized society, but what type of morals and rules does it foreshadow?
I think it break what the threat is. It breaks the patriarchy, because that is what is so attached to the nuclear family, and
Where the
it all
man is
goes
in
through the
control.
man, and the name goes through the man, and well, you don't have some guy off with some other guy, and the daughters have never been as important in any society. I think it would be lovely if we got rid of that,
Yeah, I mean, I think to the contrary about the sky is falling. I think, what it really says is that, families don't all look the same, and that's a good thing. Tim and I, are raising our son, and he came into our family when he was 8, and, people would ask us, well, what's it like, as a gay couple raising, a child? And I said, I just want to make sure he gets his homework done tonight.
Right.
And we've got a parent-teacher conference coming up, and then we've got to do the laundry, and we're going to try to sneak out and go to the movies. And I don't think that was radically different than our straight neighbors that live next door. So we're a family. Whether we're two people of the same gender or two people of opposite gender, it's a family. It's a couple.
Elizabeth, you're holding the mic. Do you have another question in the time we have left? You don't have to have another question. Tim, do you have a comment? You don't have to give the mic to him if you have a question.
I'm still trying to think of how to word it.
Oh, well, think quickly.
Well, I mean, we talked a little bit about this society and its kind of the structure of it, and the thing that struck me, and I'm interested in people's reactions, is how much of the struggle of the LGBT community is a struggle against people's kind of almost human and natural instinct to cling to the familiar and the known and be scared of the different or the unknown. And how do we break through that to kind of move the movement forward? And I think that kind of dynamic doesn't simply affect the LGBT community, but race relations, international relations. It seems like a lot of it breaks down to a clinging to the familiar, the known, and the established, as opposed to I don't know it. It's outside of my circle or my knowledge, so I'm going to be afraid. I'm going to be against it. I'm going to fight against it. How much of it is just that, as opposed to power dynamics, patriarchy, you know, established power structures that are resisting the change.
I would think it's very easy for some people to live when they have a certain order to follow, that this is the way you do it, and this is the way it looks, and this is how things flow. And when you don't have that order, when it can be in any way, then that can be frightening, or it can be, it cause feelings of insecurity.
I agree with you, Tim, though. It's the other always that's the problem for us. You know, the other who's the Muslim, the other who's the Jew, the other who's whatever you're not. You know, I don't know if you're finding this, but even now in the lesbian community, the other is the trans. The trans who is being killed in this very area and across the country. And I've met lesbians who say, you know, it's fine, but we don't really want
And
them
the
with us.
trans is maybe a male who decides to dress as female? How would you
no, it
define
would-
the trans?
Well, you go, I mean, to me, you have an operation and you become the other. Transvestite would be you just dress.
Like a Bruce Jenner.
I think if you spoke to transgender people, they would tell you that they've always been the gender that they know themselves to be on the inside. Their body may not have looked that way, but it's not that they changed from being a man to a woman. They always were a woman. They may not have looked that way on the outside of their body, and that there's a distinction between sex, which is kind of body parts, and gender. And so, you know, it isn't so much about people changing their gender, it's about people acknowledging what their real gender is. And often when you talk to trans folks, and at the GLBT National Help Center, we talk to transgender folks all the time, and they will say, you know, I've always known that, you know, I looked in the mirror and this just is, my body isn't the way I feel inside. And so it's a matter of kind of correcting that, you know, so that they look the way they feel.
How can people get in touch with you in terms of the hotline if they have further questions, they'd like to follow up?
There's a couple of ways to reach us. You can go to our website, which is glbthotline.org. You can call us on our toll-free number, which is 1-888-843-4564. And that enables you to call us on the phone. You can also reach us online and chat with us. So if someone's too nervous to talk on the phone, they can do that. So there's lots of ways to reach us.
Quickly, Chivas, in terms of your book, how can people get it? And I think if we have a moment, even if we have time to have the book title up or a photo of the book. Oh, well, we can't. I'm told we have to
Independent
close.
bookstores. Independent bookstores is the way to get it.
Bookstores.
You can
Well,
get it all the other ways, but don't even think about it. Go to the independent bookstore.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I'd like to thank the two of you in our audience. We've had an intriguing conversation, and I'd like to thank our viewers for watching. Until next time.